We have Lloyd Singleton from Sumter County Extension here to talk to us today about pruning. Welcome, Lloyd.
Thank you.
Now, why would people need to prune? I thought part of the Florida-friendly principles are not to prune unless there's very specific reasons.
Well, there are a number of very good reasons you'd want to prune. One would be to improve the health of the plant, the shrub or the tree.
Cutting out dead areas or
dead
diseased
areas, dying or damaged areas. Yes, there's a lot of times too if you have a lot of pests affecting a certain part of a shrub, instead of trying to spray, you might be better off just removing that infected branch and get rid of the problem.
Okay.
The other reasons are to control growth. If you notice sometimes things get bigger than you originally thought they would want to be. You don't want to let them get too far out of bounds before you begin to keep them in check.
Hopefully they'll have chosen plants that are not supposed to get beyond the size.
We're going to talk about that later.
Yeah,
but
okay.
yes, right. But yeah, that's important to definitely select the right plant for their place. But in the event that it does get a little too large, you want to be able to keep it in check. The other one, another good reason, is to improve your fruiting or your flowering. The way I like to look at it is sometimes a plant's goal in life is to reproduce, and it does that by making seed. And therefore, if you have a shrub that flowers a lot, it's going to set seed and then stop flowering. Whereas if you were to remove that dead blossom before it sets seeds, it's going to want to bloom again to fill its life cycle. So you can actually improve the fruiting. And also, if you are trying to grow fruit, sometimes if you remove some extra blossom, you're going to have more of the energy of the plant put toward the fruit that does exist and get bigger and better fruit. The overall appearance, the aesthetics of the plant can definitely be helped by proper pruning. You can be hurt by improper pruning, which is why we're talking today.
And sometimes is that when you want to be able to get underneath a tree, whether you have to mow or...
Exactly. Safety is another aspect too. If you have a branch that's going to be hitting someone in the face, you're better off to remove that before someone pokes their eye out. And then also if you are going to transplant, sometimes some pruning done in advance of that can help to reduce the load of the plant and make it easier for it to respond well upon transplanting. Okay. So there's a number of good reasons to do the pruning.
When's the best time to?
It depends on the type of plant. If you're looking at a deciduous tree, let's say a live oak for instance, right now the winter months are a very good time. When the plant is dormant, you're going to have less stress on the plant. You can also see a little more clearly when it's not quite so full of leaves and get in there and actually do some of the work. If it's an evergreen shrub, like a juniper or something, you can prune that almost any time of the year. If it's a flowering shrub, you're going to want to wait to prune until after the flowering is done, but before the flower bud sets. There's a couple of different things to do there. If your flower is an azalea, for instance, you may want to prune that right after the flowering finishes, because that bud for the next year's growth is going to be set probably by July.
Now, I had a question about that, because I know up north, azaleas, we say prune right after they flower. But down here, we often get two flowerings, or flowering in the spring and in the fall for azaleas. So,
well, that's true.
When's the best time?
That's true. I tend to say remove right after the flowering, but maybe not cut so drastic. And then maybe after the fall flowering, you would want to cut them more dramatically. Crepe myrtles, you can actually remove also right after flowering, or you can wait for a dormant period, like the winter months, to do your pruning, because they do set their flower on new growth, the current year's growth.
But they don't really have to be pruned at all.
They don't, no, they don't. Definitely don't have to be crepe murdered either, which we see a lot of. Right.
Now, what kind of tools do you use to prune properly? Are there special tools required?
There really are, and that's critical. We have a slide to show that lists a few of the different, but there's some hand shears, there are loppers, and then one of my favorite is a pruning saw. It's a saw that actually has a bit of a rounded blade, nice sharp teeth, and is a great way to get in and make those cuts. It's a very narrow blade. So highly recommend investing in the right tools to do the pruning. It's going to make it much easier and much more effective.
Now, with those tools then, where do you make the cuts? It's very important to make those in the right area, the right way.
Very, very important, yes. And I have some slides that I want to show regarding tree pruning. One of the tree pruning cuts you'll need to make is when there's a little bit of included bark in a branch that's coming off of a trunk, and
A
you
really
need to,
narrow branch, and they,
right,
where
and
they
it's a
come
very,
together there in the
very
middle?
V there, and you need to get that branch off. You need to cut that away, but then also you don't want to make your cut into the collar. Each new branch has almost looks like a turtleneck, and you want to make sure that you've cut the branch just back to that collar but not into the collar, because the collar of that branch is what has the tissue that will help it heal and then become one nice straight trunk after time.
A lot of people like to do that flush cut, so it's smooth with the trunk.
And they shouldn't do that. Eventually the trunk will fill out around it and it will become smooth. The other thing that I see a lot of, I've seen a lot of it in this area, is people leave a 4 or 5 inch stub, and that's really tricking the tree, because you're telling the tree then you want that to still be a branch, and you're going to have this big fluff. It's almost going to look like a poodle's tail when it sets out new growth. Whereas if you cut that stub all the way back to the collar, the tree's going to know that you didn't want that to be a branch. You want that to just be trunk, and it will respond appropriately. Another slide I have here is on removing larger branches. And this is critical. If you just start cutting from the top on a large branch, the weight of that branch is going to drop it down and it's going to rip the bark. It's very important to undercut from the bottom of the branch first,
Just a little bit,
cut it a little bit, and then you cut from the top to remove the weight. You can also cut the branch further out to get the major weight off, and then go back and make the cut where you need to.
The really good one that's right near the collar.
Good one, right.
But leaving the collar.
Yes,
Yeah.
leaving the collar, and you don't have the weight to deal with. Position of the cut is very important. Again, not to go into the collar, but also the pruning angle is important. You don't want to have it too steep. You don't necessarily want to have it horizontal either. You may want to have it at an angle, but somewhere above the bud, because you want that growth to continue if you're doing a shrub.
Yeah.
So there's an illustration on the slide there, and number A is the proper pruning angle for that.
Even with trees, if you want to try to direct their growth, that's
Correct.
the way to cut
And
that.
if you want the branch to go that way, then make your cut right above a bud that heads that direction.
Now, do you need to use any kind of wound dressing? I've seen the special wound dressings you're supposed to paint on the cut. That's supposed to keep them from getting rotten.
You do not. Research has shown that it is really not effective. The tree actually has what it takes to heal that wound properly. If you've made the proper cut, you're not going to have a problem. So don't slather that tar all over it. It's not going to help.
What about palms? Do we need to prune palms?
Sometimes palms need to be pruned more for a safety reason. If your aesthetic reasoning requires it, you can, but we see a lot of palms that are over pruned. And a rule of thumb there is don't ever prune your palms any fronds that are below an imaginary 180-degree line. In other words, any of those lower fronds can come off, but once you get up and you start to see some V-shaped palm heads, you're taking too much. That plant needs those leaves to be able to generate the carbohydrates it needs to make its own food. I've always used as a rule of thumb is if a frond has more than half of that frond still green, leave it on. Leave it on. And most palms in Florida are actually self-pruning. When that frond is really ready to go, it will fall off itself.
We don't have much time left. What about hedges?
Hedges, it's most important. There's actually a slide to show this. Have your top more narrow and your base wide. The reason is if you go the other way, you're not letting enough light into the bottom of the shrub or the hedge, and it will get thin. So always make sure to have the top of the hedge, this would be a side view, make sure it's more narrow at top and wider at the base, and the sunlight can get all the way to it.
Otherwise you're going to get just like a tabletop of foliage and the rest is all
It's all
open.
bare underneath, exactly.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you very much.